They say the younger generation carries your name forward, your pride, your bloodline. But what happens when that same bloodline sharpens its teeth and turns on you, waiting for the moment you stumble so they can rip apart what you built? I found out the hard way, staring at a message thread on my grandson's phone where he and his sister were laughing about who would get my house first, who would flip the garage into an Airbnb, and who would sell Grandpa's medals on eBay. My hands didn't shake, not because I wasn't angry, but because something colder had settled into me, the same cold that kept me alive on battlefields where hesitation meant death. And in that moment, I understood one thing with brutal clarity. If my own grandchildren wanted war, then war was what they were going to get, but on my terms, not theirs. The night was heavy, humid, Dallas air pressing against the windows like a weight. I sat alone at the kitchen table, the glow of the fridge light spilling across the linoleum as the door creaked open and shut. They thought I didn't notice things anymore, that I forgot dates, misplaced my pills, got confused about what day it was. That was the story they'd been spreading, Grandpa's slipping, Grandpa's not all there. I kept my back straight, my mind sharper than ever, and listened to their footsteps upstairs, the creak of floorboards I'd known since the day I laid them with my own hands. When they came back down, laughing too loud for midnight, I stayed silent. My granddaughter, Haley, tried the sweet routine she thought still worked on me. She set a glass of water on the table, kissed my forehead, whispered, "Don't stay up too late, Grandpa." I nodded. My eyes stayed on her phone, screen lighting up just enough for me to catch a flash of the message she'd just sent. He didn't notice anything. Tomorrow we'll check the drawer. My drawer. My safe. My life in a steel box they'd been circling like scavengers. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching from. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, ceiling fan groaning overhead, shadows cutting across the walls. My mind replayed the words I'd read on that phone. Grandpa won't even miss it. He won't last long anyway. The casual cruelty of children who hadn't earned a damn thing, but already thought the world owed them my blood and sweat. I'd spent decades fighting wars, burying friends, working jobs that broke my back just to keep this house standing. And now these spoiled, greedy kids thought they could bury me before I was in the ground. At dawn I brewed coffee stronger than my doctor would approve of, the bitter steam filling the kitchen. I opened the closet and pulled down the old metal box Mary used to call my shadow chest. Inside wasn't money, not the way they imagined. It was records, maps, photos, things only a soldier would think of saving. But today I added something new, a small black recorder, smaller than a lighter. If my grandchildren wanted to prove me senile, then I'd prove them serpents. If they wanted to rob me blind, I'd show the world their hands already red with theft. The first move wasn't to confront. No, confrontation is what they expected. Young people think anger makes an old man sloppy. They never met the part of me that could sit still for days on end, waiting for an enemy to make his move. They didn't know their grandfather had been trained to watch, to study, to prepare. And so I smiled that morning, smiled cold and thin as the blade of a knife, and whispered into my empty kitchen, "Go ahead, kids. Make your play." Because what they didn't know yet was that I'd already made mine. Morning sunlight spilled across the kitchen, catching dust in the air like smoke from a battlefield. I sat at the table in my undershirt, staring at a pill bottle I'd lined up deliberately crooked. When Haley walked in, yawning and scrolling her phone, I nudged it just enough to make it look like my hand had slipped. She smirked. "Careful, Grandpa," she said, like she was talking to a child who couldn't be trusted with his toys. Good. Let her believe it. Lucas came in a few minutes later, my oldest grandson, already dressed sharp though he had nowhere important to be. He sniffed the coffee, wrinkled his nose, and asked casually, "Hey, Grandpa, do you ever forget to lock the safe?" "You know, old habits." He said it like a joke, but his eyes gave him away. Hungry. Waiting. Testing. I leaned back, squinted, and forced my voice to drag just a little. "Safe? Which safe?" Their eyes met for half a second, and in that glance I saw everything. They thought they'd already won. Two vultures circling a man they assumed was too tired to sweat them away. I let them laugh, Let them walk out the door whispering to each other, but my mind was already sketching the battlefield. That afternoon I drove into town, slow enough to look frail, steady enough to keep my purpose hidden. The clerk at the hardware store didn't ask why an 80-year-old man was buying 2 miniature cameras and a pack of motion sensors. He just bagged them, nodded politely, and handed me the receipt. Back home, I moved through the house with the precision of a soldier setting traps. One camera inside the study pointed at the safe. Another tucked under the stairwell where I knew they'd sneak down at night. The recorder stayed in the drawer they liked to rummage. By evening, I had turned my house into a quiet ambush. At dinner, I pushed food around my plate, made a show of forgetting the salt. Lucas leaned back smugly, telling Haley about some party he wanted to throw once we clear out the place. My own house, my walls, my memories. I chewed the dry meatloaf and said nothing. Anger is easy. Silence is strategy. Later that night, I left the study door cracked just enough for temptation to seep out. Inside the safe, I'd placed a manila envelope stamped property deed in big black letters. But the papers inside were nothing more than old tax forms and faded receipts. A decoy, real enough to make them believe, fake enough to choke them when the truth surfaced. I pretended to doze in my recliner while the house settled. At 11:43 p.m., the floorboards above groaned. 2 sets of footsteps, careful but not careful enough. The faint glow of a phone flashlight cut through the dark. I kept my breathing slow, shallow, just loud enough to mimic sleep. The recorder caught everything. Haley whispering, "Check the drawer. He's too old to notice." Lucas muttering, "Shut up, just grab it fast." The shuffle of paper, the snap of a phone camera. My fake deed disappearing into their greedy hands. I smiled into the dark. They thought they'd stolen something precious. In reality, they'd just walked straight into my first trap. At dawn I rose early, brewed coffee, and sat at the table with the calm of a man who'd dated his prey. When Haley finally stumbled downstairs, hair messy, she froze. The safe door was locked again, papers back in place, like nothing had happened. She looked at me carefully. I sipped my coffee and asked, "Sleep well?" She mumbled something, eyes darting, and hurried outside. The war had begun, and they didn't even realize I'd already written the first chapter. The trick to dismantling an enemy isn't to strike hard. It's to make them strike each other. I learned that in jungles where the real battle wasn't fought with rifles, but with patience. My grandchildren thought they were circling me. What they didn't know was that I'd already started circling them. By Saturday morning, I had everything I needed. The camera under the stairwell had caught Lucas with his phone flashlight, prying through my drawer like a thief. The one in the study showed Haley's hands shaking as she stuffed the property deed envelope into her jacket. I watched the footage twice, not because I needed proof, but because it reminded me what greed looks like up close. Their laughter after stealing was the same sound I remembered from barracks poker games, smug, empty, waiting for a bullet of truth. I saved the clips onto a small flash drive and slipped it into my pocket. But I wasn't going to confront them yet. No, better to seed doubt first. That afternoon, I left the manila envelope casually on the kitchen counter, no safe, no lock, just sitting there like I'd forgotten it. Across the top, I scrawled a note in thick marker, for executor, "Do not open." When Lucas came by, pretending he needed to borrow tools, his eyes landed on it immediately. He tried to play it cool, asked me how my day was, made small talk about football. But I saw the twitch in his jaw, the way his gaze kept snapping back to the envelope. When he finally left, the envelope was still on the counter, but I knew he'd tell Haley. And sure enough, that night I heard them arguing in the driveway. I didn't have to press close to catch the words. "You said it was the deed, Haley." Lucas barked, his voice carrying in the hot night air. "I thought it was." "How was I supposed to know it was just receipts?" She snapped back. "You rushed it. If you'd waited, maybe we'd—" "Oh, shut up. You were just as greedy as me." Their voices climbed, louder, harsher. I sat in the darkened living room, listening, smiling coldly. Seeds don't take long to sprout when you water them with suspicion. The next morning, I added fuel. I pulled Lucas aside while Haley was upstairs. I let my voice tremble just enough to sound fragile. "Son, you're the oldest. If anything happens to me, It'll all fall on your shoulders. You understand." His chest swelled with pride, with that hungry confidence. He nodded, too quick. "Of course, Grandpa. You can count on me." Later, when Haley came down, I repeated the same line but with her name. "You're the responsible one, sweetheart. I know you'll make sure things go to the right person." Her smile was thin, nervous. "Of course, Grandpa." By nightfall, they weren't speaking to each other. Haley slammed doors. Lucas stomped around like a soldier denied his orders. I stayed quiet, cooked myself a simple dinner, and let the tension build. Then I made my move. I left my study light on, blinds half open, and laid out a new folder on the desk labeled Amended Will. Inside were blank pages, nothing at all. But I knew what the glow of that lamp would do. From the hallway I heard their whispers, sharp, urgent. Lucas hissed, "He's changing it." Haley replied, "Then we have to move faster." I turned off the lamp and locked my bedroom door, but my smile lingered long into the night. They thought I was stumbling toward the grave. In truth, I was leading them straight into it, step by greedy step. And by the time they realized it, it would already be too late. The line between thought and action is thin. I've seen young men cross it with a twitch of a finger, a whisper in the dark, a desperate gamble to prove they weren't afraid. My grandchildren were no different. They thought betrayal was just talk, a game of whispers and stolen papers. But now their voices carried something sharper. Intention. Tuesday night, I caught them in the garage. I'd left the door cracked just enough, slipped the recorder into a pile of rags. The smell of oil and rust filled the air, but over it came their words, hushed but heated. "He's slipping," Lucas said. "Everyone knows it. We just have to show it. Doctor signs a paper, court says he's incompetent. Then the house is ours." Haley scoffed. "Court takes too long. What if something happened?" "He's old, Lucas. One bad fall, one fire in that drafty place. Who would even ask questions?" For a moment I didn't breathe. My own blood, plotting accidents. My fingers curled around the wooden workbench until the splinters bit my skin. I'd buried men who'd said less and acted more. "Don't be stupid," Lucas snapped. "Accidents bring cops. Paperwork is clean. Safer." "But slower," Haley countered, her voice dripping impatience. "I'm tired of waiting." I shut the door softly, walked back into the night air, and stared at the stars. The same stars I'd stared at from tents in deserts and jungles. Back then, I fought men I didn't know. Now I fought the faces of my own family. The next morning, I played my part. I forgot to turn off the stove, let the smell of gas linger until Haley walked in. She rushed over, turned the knob, shook her head, muttered, "See? He's losing it." I gave her a blank look, even added a confused mumble for effect. She thought she'd caught me. In reality, I'd caught her reaction. That afternoon, Lucas cornered me on the porch. "Grandpa," he said, voice dripping fake concern, "maybe it's time you let us handle things. Your bills, your house, everything." I stared at him a long time, let the silence bite. Then I nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right, son." The hunger in his eyes was so bright it was almost blinding. He thought he'd won. That night, I pulled out an old footlocker from the attic. Inside were relics of another life, camouflage jackets, faded maps, a knife with scratches across the blade. At the bottom was a battered cassette recorder. I dusted it off, tested the tape. Still worked. I smiled. Technology changes, but lies don't. The plan was simple. Give them exactly what they wanted, but make sure the world saw what they did with it. The next day, I forgot my folder marked medical records on the kitchen counter. Inside were fake reports I'd typed myself, phrases like possible cognitive decline, further evaluation needed. Just enough to look convincing. Haley found it first. She snapped a picture, texted someone, then stuffed the papers into her bag. Later, Lucas demanded to see them. She refused. Their voices rose, sharp and ugly, tearing into each other in my living room while I sat upstairs listening. "You're hiding it," Lucas sparked. "I found it, not you," Haley spat back. "If anyone takes over, it'll be me. You think you can handle this house? You couldn't handle a dog, let alone better than you, drunk on Dad's truck payments." They were circling each other now, like wolves fighting for scraps. And I didn't have to lift a finger. That night, I locked my bedroom door, set the recorder under my pillow, and whispered to the dark, "Tomorrow, we turn the screw tighter." Because they thought they were hunting me, but I was the one dragging them closer to the trap. By Thursday, the masks were gone. They didn't even bother with polite smiles or fake concern anymore. The hunger in their eyes had sharpened into something raw, something dangerous. Lucas cornered me in the living room after dinner. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets, but his shoulders carried the stiffness of a man ready to throw a punch. "Grandpa," he said, his tone clipped, "we need to settle things. You can't keep running this place. Everyone sees it. You're slipping. It's time." I leaned back in my chair, stared at him through the cigarette smoke curling from my ashtray. "Time for what, Lucas?" "For you to hand it over. The house, the land, the safe, everything." His voice cracked slightly at the end, the pressure leaking out of his bravado. Before I could answer, Haley stormed in, arms crossed tight, eyes blazing. "Don't you dare cut me out," she snapped at him. Then she turned on me, her tone syrupy but her words sharp. "Grandpa, I love you. But let's be real, you can't handle this anymore. We'll take care of it. Together." "Together," Lucas muttered, rolling his eyes. They stood there, facing me like two lawyers in a courtroom, each certain the verdict would go their way. I stubbed out my cigarette, rose slowly, and let my silence drag until they shifted nervously. "You want this house?" I asked, my voice low. "You want everything I've built?" They both nodded, eager, greedy. "Fine," I said, and walked past them into the study. Their footsteps echoed behind me like hyenas chasing scraps. I opened the safe, let them watch as I pulled out another manila folder. This one was thicker, stamped in bold letters. "Last will and testament, updated." Their eyes widened. Their bodies leaned forward as though the paper itself was a magnet. I dropped it on the desk. "Take a good look." They scrambled over each other to grab it, tearing the folder open. Inside were documents that looked official. My signature, notary stamps, legal phrases in dense paragraphs. But the contents were poison, designed carefully. The first page read, "I, Robert Selvers, being of sound mind, leave my estate, house, possessions, and accounts to the State of Texas Veterans Fund." Not a dime to them. Haley gasped, face straining pale. Lucas cursed under his breath. "This can't be real." "It's real enough," I said calmly. "Filed and witnessed." Haley spun toward me, her voice breaking. You can't do that. We're family." "Family?" My voice cracked like a whip. "Family doesn't sneak through my drawers. Family doesn't plan fires in the night. Family doesn't laugh about selling my medals." Lucas froze, his eyes snapping to me. What do you mean fires?" I smiled then cold. "You should really check if your phones are recording when you whisper in garages." The silence that followed was heavy. He swallowed hard. Haley shook her head, denial plastered across her face, but fear leaked through. "They knew. I had them." I leaned forward, voice cutting like a blade. "I've lived through jungles, deserts, and wars you can't imagine. If you think I won't fight my own blood, you've forgotten what kind of man raised this family." They didn't answer. Lucas shoved the papers back into the folder, muttering, "This isn't over." Haley's eyes burned with tears, but she said nothing. They stormed out, slamming the door behind them. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't peace. It was the silence before the second volley. I lit another cigarette, stared at the smoke twisting upward, and let the thought settle heavy in my chest. They've crossed the line. Now it's my turn to draw blood. The quiet didn't last. Quiet never does when greed has sunk its claws into people. By Saturday, the air around the house was so heavy with tension it felt like the walls themselves were listening. My grandkids weren't kids anymore. They'd stopped hiding, stopped pretending. Now they were predators circling an old man they thought was too slow to notice the shadows. That morning I caught the first sign. An official-looking envelope stuck half under my front door. I bent down, knee stiff, and pulled it inside. Across the top, notice of petition for guardianship. My own name listed in cold black ink with Lucas Selvers and Haley Selvers as the petitioners. The words blurred for a second, not because my eyes were weak, but because fury rattled my chest hard enough to shake my vision. They hadn't wasted time. They were trying to put me under legal lock and key, to make me a prisoner in my own home. I sat at the kitchen table with the papers spread out before me, the smell of burnt coffee lingering in the air. The language was sharp, clinical, subject to episodes of confusion, at risk of financial exploitation, requires supervision. My grandchildren had written me off like a busted piece of furniture, something to be stored away until convenient. But here's what they didn't know. I'd lived too long in a world where paperwork was just another weapon. And I'd spent the last week forging my own arsenal. That afternoon, I drove to see Martin, my lawyer, and one of the last friends I trusted. He'd fought his own wars in courtrooms instead of jungles, but he had the same steel in his eyes. I slid the papers across his desk. "They're moving fast," I said flatly. He scanned them, eyebrows tightening. "Guardianship petitions. They're serious. If a judge buys this, they won't." I cut him off. "Not with what I've got." I handed him a small flash drive. On it were the recordings, Haley whispering about accidents, Lucas bragging about the house being ours any day now. Martin listened through the first few minutes, then leaned back, exhaling through his teeth. "You play a dangerous game, Bob." I met his gaze steady. "Dangerous is what keeps me alive." He nodded slowly. "All right. I'll stall this petition in court. Buy you time, but you need to be careful. They're not just greedy, they're desperate. Desperate people get sloppy." That was exactly what I was counting on. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching from. By Sunday, they made their next move. I woke to the acrid stench of smoke. My heart lurched, instinct snapping awake before my brain even caught up. I stumbled out of bed, checked the hall, nothing burning. But when I stepped onto the porch, the source was clear. A small trash can at the corner of my yard, flames licking up paper and cardboard, the wind carrying ash toward the house. I doused it with the garden hose, the cold water hissing against the embers. Inside the charred pile, I found the remains of what looked like one of my own bank statements. The account number still visible, my name half burned but intact. They were sending a message. "We can touch your life. We can erase it piece by piece." I didn't call the fire department. Didn't call the police. No, I dragged the blackened can into the garage, set it right next to the recorder I'd hidden last week. I wanted the smell of smoke to linger, to seep into the walls, so every time they stepped inside they'd be reminded of how far they'd gone and how much further I could go. That night, I played weaker than ever. I forgot to lock the back door, left a lamp burning in the study, even muttered loud enough for them to overhear about misplacing the safe key. I wanted them hungry, reckless. And it worked. At 1:17 a.m., the stairwell camera caught Lucas creeping down, hoodie pulled low, flashlight in hand. He slipped into the study, yanked open drawers, shoved papers into his backpack. At 1:24, Haley followed, hissing at him to wait for me. They argued in whisper sharp as knives, shoving each other in the dark. The safe door clanged. My decoy folder disappeared into their bag. And I sat in my locked bedroom, recorder running, listening to it all through the old vents. Their betrayal wasn't whispers anymore, it was evidence. The next morning, I didn't mention the mess. I just sipped coffee, watched them squirm through their fake smiles. Haley's hands trembled when she buttered her toast. Lucas wouldn't meet my eyes. Finally, I set down my cup and spoke. "Funny thing," I said casually, "I found the safe locked tight this morning. Can't even remember putting it back myself." The silence that followed was perfect. Haley glanced at Lucas. Lucas glared at her. Suspicion widened the cracks I'd carved between them. I leaned back, folded my arms. "You two fighting about something?" Neither answered. They left quickly after breakfast, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. I waited until the house was quiet, then pulled out the real prize, the flash drive. This one didn't just have the recordings, it had the video. Their faces caught red-handed, their voices plotting in my study. I stared at the little piece of plastic in my hand, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the weight of what I was about to do. These weren't strangers. They were my grandchildren. My blood. My last chance at leaving something good behind. But then I remembered Haley's words in the garage, her voice low and sharp. One fire in that drafty place. Who would even ask questions? That wasn't family. That was an enemy. And enemies didn't get mercy. I slid the flash drive into my pocket, whispered into the empty kitchen, time to go on the offensive. Because from this moment forward, it wasn't about defense. It was about ending the war they had started. There's a moment in every battle when the enemy realizes they've lost control. I've seen it in the whites of men's eyes in foxholes, in the stammer of commanders who suddenly understand their maps don't match the ground. And now, at 80 years old, I was ready to watch that same realization crawl across the faces of my grandchildren. The decision came to me in the middle of a sleepless night. The house was silent except for the hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of settling beans. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the flash drive, that tiny coffin of evidence. Hiding it wasn't enough. Handing it to lawyers wasn't enough. No, Haley and Lucas needed to see their own words burn them alive, and everyone else needed to see it too. By Monday morning, I'd made my calls. An old friend from church, 2 neighbors who still owed me favors, and Martin, my lawyer. I told them to come by Wednesday evening. Family announcement, I said. Bring your curiosity. That was bait enough. In a town like ours, whispers spread faster than wildfires. On Wednesday, the house smelled of polish and smoke from the trash can I'd kept in the garage, the reminder of what Haley and Lucas had already tried. I set folding chairs in the living room, dragged out the old projector I hadn't touched in years, and pinned a sheet against the far wall. By 6 o'clock, the place buzzed with voices. Neighbors packed shoulder to shoulder, coffee cups in hand, waiting for the show. Haley arrived first, dressed too fine for an ordinary evening, her smile strained. She kissed my cheek like nothing was wrong, but her eyes darted nervously at the crowd. Lucas showed up 10 minutes later, jaw tight, sweat shining on his temples. He muttered hello and stood stiff against the wall. They hadn't spoken to each other in days. I could see it in the way they avoided even looking across the room. When the chatter dimmed, I stepped forward, the flash drive clutched between my fingers. Thank you all for coming, I began, my voice steady. You've probably heard rumors about me. That I'm slipping. That I'm too old to know left from right. Tonight, I want to clear the air. Not with my words, but with theirs. I nodded to Martin. He slid the flash drive into the laptop. The projector hummed, light cutting through the dim room. Then the video began. First came the stairwell footage, Lucas creeping down in his hoodie, flashlight bobbing, rifling through my desk like a common thief. Gasps rippled through the crowd. He shifted uncomfortably, muttered something under his breath. Next came Haley, whispering sharp, impatient words, one fire in that drafty place. Who would even ask questions? The room fell silent. You could hear the blood drain from her face as she stumbled back a step, lips trembling. Then their argument in the garage, her snapping, "I'm tired of waiting," and his reply, "Accidents bring cops. Paperwork is clean." The neighbor's eyes darted between the screen and the two of them, whispers rising like a tide. Haley tried to speak, her voice shaking. That's not he, it's out of context, but the room had already turned. Lucas's fists clenched, his face red, but he didn't dare open his mouth. I let the footage run until the last word faded, then stepped forward again. You think I'm slipping? My voice cut the air like a knife. You think I don't see? My own grandchildren plotting my death, my ruin, laughing about my life like it's some prize to be divided. I pointed to the screen, to their frozen faces. There's your truth. Not whispered, not imagined. Seen, heard, recorded. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Finally, a neighbor muttered, "My God," and shook his head. Another whispered, "Monsters." Haley broke first. She rushed toward me, tears streaking her makeup, her words tumbling in panic. "Grandpa, please, we didn't mean it. We were just talking. Just stupid talk. We'd never." I barked. "Never?" The smoke in my yard, the stolen papers, the forged petition for guardianship, was that talk too? She froze. The room erupted in murmurs, shock giving way to disgust. Lucas stood rigid, eyes blazing at me, then at Haley. He finally snarled, "This is your fault. You pushed it too far." "And you followed," I said coldly. For the first time since this began, I saw it, the cracks in their armor turning into fractures. Haley sobbing, Lucas shaking, the crowd staring at them like strangers. They were cornered, stripped of lies, exposed for what they were. I turned back to the audience. "I called you here because truth matters. Because blood is no excuse for betrayal. I'm not incompetent. I'm not confused. I am very much awake. And I want every one of you to remember what you saw tonight." The projector clicked off, plunging the room into heavy silence. Lucas stormed out first, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Haley followed minutes later, crying into her hands. The neighbors filed out slowly, whispering, shaking their heads, casting glances back at me as if to say, "I can't believe it." When the last of them was gone, the house was quiet again. I sat alone in the glow of the lamp, the smell of smoke still faint in the air. My heart was steady, my hands calm. For the first time in weeks, I knew one thing: they'd realized they couldn't beat me. But the war wasn't finished. Not yet. The final blow was still waiting. And when it landed, there'd be nothing left of their schemes but ashes. The neighbors' whispers lingered long after the last car rolled out of my driveway. The house felt quieter than ever, but not the kind of quiet that soothes. This was the silence of a battlefield at dawn, where smoke still hangs in the air and the dead haven't yet been counted. For 2 days I didn't hear from them. Not a call, not a text. Just silence. I thought maybe, just maybe, shame had finally taken root. But shame is a seed that rarely grows in poisoned soil. By the third night, the sound of tires crunching gravel told me exactly what I needed to know. Lucas and Haley didn't bother knocking. They stormed in together, united again not by love, but by desperation. Lucas's jaw was tight, Haley's eyes red, makeup streaked. They looked less like grandchildren now and more like cornered animals. "You think you can humiliate us?" Lucas snarled. "In front of the whole neighborhood? You ruined us, Grandpa." "No," I said, my voice flat. "You ruined yourselves." Haley's voice cracked, shrill. "We could have had everything. You don't need this house, this land. You don't need anything." I stood slowly, every joint stiff but steady, and looked them both in the eyes. "Need has nothing to do with it. This is my life. And you tried to steal it before I was cold in the ground." Lucas stepped closer, fists clenched. For a moment I thought he might swing. Instead, he spat his words like venom. "If you won't give it, we'll take it. Papers, no papers. We'll find a way." I let the silence hang just long enough to slice through their anger. Then I walked into the study, pulled open the safe, and set a thick folder on the desk. Across the front, "Final will, executed." Their eyes locked on it, wild, greedy even now. Haley's breath came short, like she was staring at salvation. "Go on," I said coldly. "Open it." She lunged forward, tore the folder open. Pages spilled out across the desk. But instead of their names, their inheritance, their imagined fortune, they saw line after line of one thing. I, Robert Selvers, leave all property, assets, and accounts to the Texas Veterans Foundation to provide housing and care for soldiers without family. Not a dime for them. Haley's hands shook. Lucas's face drained of color. You can't," he stammered. "I can." I did. Haley screamed, slammed the papers down, tears streaming. "We're your blood. You can't just give it all away to strangers." I leaned forward, voice low, sharp as the edge of a bayonet. "Blood is earned, not inherited." Lucas's shoulders sagged. The fight drained out of him, replaced with something hollow. He muttered, "You'll die alone, old man." I stepped closer, close enough for him to see the steel in my eyes, the same steel that had stared down rifles and rockets and men twice as dangerous as him. "No, Lucas. I already lived alone. But you," I pointed at both of them, my hands steady, my voice like thunder. "You'll live the rest of your lives knowing you were cut off. Knowing you lost not because I beat you, but because you betrayed me." The room went still. No more shouting. No more bravado. Just two broken kids staring at the ruins of their own greed. They left without another word, the slam of the door echoing through the house. I gathered the scattered papers, slid them back into the folder, and returned it to the safe. The lock clicked shut with a finality that felt like a gunshot. I sat back in my chair, the house heavy with silence, and let the truth settle. I hadn't just ended their schemes. I'd ended the idea that they ever deserved a piece of me. My hand rested on the Bible, the medals, the flash drive, all of it tucked away now. I whispered to the empty room, to Mary, to the ghosts of brothers long gone, to anyone still listening. They thought I was their inheritance. Now they know I was their last chance. If you liked the story, please subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and write in the comments if something like this has ever happened in your life. I'd love to hear your stories. Thank you for watching.